Good evening. Welcome to the Massachusetts Historical Society. I'm Charlie Ames. In a minute, Dennis Fiore will introduce our speaker, but first, here are 3 things you need to know about MHS. First, we're one of the finest independent research libraries in the U.S. We hold the presidential libraries of 3 presidents. We hold many iconic documents of the Revolution and founding. And we hold a unique collection of family histories, family papers, spanning 7 or more generations. In the 225 years since our founding, thousands of researchers and scholars have beaten a path to our door, and the research they've done right here in this room plays a large role in our understanding of American history today. Second, we're dedicated to a deeper and broader public appreciation of the American experience. Through programs like this one, we celebrate the perspective American history brings to our own time. The same is true of our exhibitions. Beginning in February as part of our 225th year, we'll be exhibiting the private papers and drawings of Thomas Jefferson. And as Dennis likes to say, you can see replicas at Monticello, but if you want to see the real thing, you have to come here to 1154 Boylston Street. And next year, we plan to launch a new education center to support the teaching of history in our schools. Through programs and exhibitions like these, we explore the ideas, values, successes, and failures that bind us together as a nation. Third, we depend on contributions of people just like you. We're the place for history in Boston and New England. If you believe, as we do, that a renewed understanding of our nation's past is fundamental to its future, I hope you will open up your checkbook, if not your safe deposit box, and contribute as generously as you can. Thank you again for being here tonight and for supporting the MHS. Dennis.
Thank you, Charlie. And if you happen to have family papers in those safe deposit boxes, we wouldn't mind having those either. It's always a pleasure to welcome David McCullough and his wife, Rosalie, who's here tonight, wonderful, to the MHS. This is a place where we spent many days, many of them in this very room, which is our reading room by day. And of course, unless you've been on a desert island or in outer space, he requires no introduction. But maybe I'll give you a bit of a refresher. David McCullough has been widely acclaimed as a master of the art of narrative history. He is twice winner of the Pulitzer Prize, twice winner of the National Book Award, and has received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award. He is also the most recent recipient of our highest award, the Kennedy Medal. His most recent book, the widely praised The Wright Brothers, the focus of tonight's presentation, has been #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. The Greater Journey, Americans in Paris, also #1 bestseller, has been called dazzling, history to be savored. His 1776 has been acclaimed a classic, while John Adams, published in 2001, remains one of the most praised and widely read American biographies of all time, and of course, our favorite. His other books include The Johnstown Flood, The Great Bridge, The Path Between the Seas, Mornings on Horseback, Brave Companions, and Truman. His books have been published in 17 languages, and none have ever been out of print. He's not only an author, David has been an editor, a teacher, a lecturer, and familiar presence on public television. You may remember him as host of Smithsonian World and The American Experience, and narrator of numerous documentaries, including Ken Burns' The Civil War. His is also the narrator's voice in the movie Seabiscuit. John Adams, the 7-part miniseries on HBO, based on his book and produced by Tom Hanks, was one of the most acclaimed television events of recent years. He is also one of the few private citizens to speak before a joint session of Congress. In the words of the citation accompanying his honorary degree from Yale, as an historian, he paints with words, giving us pictures of the American people that live, breathe, and above all, confront the fundamental issues of courage, achievement, and moral character. Please join with me in welcoming a great friend of the Massachusetts Historical Society, David McCullough.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you all very much. It is a joy to be back here and to see so many old friends and familiar surroundings. I've had some of the happiest days of my working life right here in this very room, and particularly the years I spent doing the research for my book on John Adams. I also appreciate that you mentioned my work for public television. I had an incident take place this past winter right here in the neighborhood at the Star Market here in Back Bay that I want to tell you about. As you remember, there were interludes between the blizzards of 2 or 3 days. And in order to find provisions by which to survive, you had to get out to a supermarket or market somewhere. And Rosalie and I did this several times, and one of the times we made up a list of all that we needed, and I decided I would be the hero and venture forth myself over to Star Market from our apartment, and I got there and found it was absolute mob scene because everybody was trying to seek provisions to sustain life. And I went about finding the items that we'd put on the list, and I found everything except the cashew nuts. And as you all well know, cashews are essential to survival. And there was a fellow walking by with a Star Market label on his shirt, and I said, "Excuse me, could you tell me, please, where the cashew nuts are?" He said, "Yes, follow me." So I followed him, and we went around a couple of turns, and he pointed it out, and I thanked him very much, and he went on his way. And about 10 minutes later, I was checking out at the cash register, and he came up to me, and he said, "That voice, your voice." He said, "Have I heard that on television?" I said, "Yes, there's probably a good chance you have." He said, "Were you the narrator of the Ken Burns series on the Civil War?" I said, "Yes, I was." He said, "Well, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. When that series first came on the air, I was suffering terribly from insomnia." I'd hear your voice and go right out. So I hope it doesn't have that effect on any of you tonight. One of the most obvious and important lessons of history is that almost nothing of consequence is ever accomplished alone. It's a joint effort. And certainly that's true of the kind of books that I have been writing through my working life, biography and history. All those people that are listed in the acknowledgments of a book of the kind that I do are there for good reason. Editors, copy editors, art directors, archivists, librarians, specialists in one subject or another, members of your own family, old friends, they're all part of it. But no one has played a bigger part in my work for 50 years now than my editor-in-chief, who's also my wife, Rosalie. And we have 5 children, 19 grandchildren, and she's mission control and secretary of the Treasury and chair of the ethics committee and the best dancer I've ever danced with in my life and my polar star. Ro, would you please stand up, sweetheart? I was asked to come tonight and talk a little bit about not just my book on the Wright brothers, but how I go about my work, which I'm happy to do. I stress at the beginning that there is no one way to do books of the kind that I and others write. Each writer has his own or her own way of going about it, approaching it. But I'll tell you how I do it, and I will try to explain it so that it makes sense. But I think that above all, I'd like to start with a quotation that you might be surprised by, because it would seem to come from someone who would have no appreciation or understanding of the process of history. This was written in his diary by Eugène Delacroix, the great French painter, in the year 1850. He said, "The historian's task appears to me to be the most difficult of all, because he needs to give unswerving, unceasing attention to 101 things at the same time, and must preserve those quotations, precise recitals of events and facts that are only relatively important, and the enthusiasm that gives life to his story and makes it something more than an extract from the newspapers." This is the essence of what I think history requires of its writers. The sense of life. History is about human experience. It's about people. It's a human chronology, human chronicle. When in the course of human events, Jefferson wrote famously, and the operative word there is human. So you've got to try to get through to those people. Who were they? What were they like? What were they fearful of? What did they hope to accomplish? What motivated them? And in order to do that, you obviously have to read what they wrote in letters and diaries and in reminiscences. And you have to also read what they read. Very, very important. We are what we read to a much greater degree than most people realize. And this came through to me vividly working right here in this room. I was reading one of John Adams' letters to Abigail in one of the darkest times of the Revolutionary War. And he said in the letter, "We can't ensure success in this struggle, but we can deserve it." And when I read that, I thought, oh, isn't that fabulous? How different from the way we think today, when all is talked about is getting to the top, being first, succeeding. No, he's saying, what matters is, do you deserve to get to the top? Do you deserve to be first? Do you deserve to be famous? Do you deserve to succeed? And I was giving great tribute to Adams' originality of thought until I read the same thing in a letter about a month or two later, in a letter written by George Washington. And I thought, wait a minute, this is interesting. Who's copying whom? And I thought, maybe they're quoting something, because in the 18th century, they didn't use quotation marks. So I got out the old Bartlett's familiar quotations, got into the 18th century, and bingo, sure enough, there it was. Addison's, it's from the very popular play, Cato, by Joseph Addison, and was used several times over. When Nathan Hale said, "My only regret is that I have but one life to give for my country," that's a quote from Cato, from that same play. It was part of who they were, what they read, what they soaked up. My feeling is that Hale delivered that line, because he knew that the English soldiers who were about to hang him also knew that that was the English play. And so my feeling is he delivered that line, "My only regret is that I have but one life to give for my country." Not our country, my country. So if you have to embark on understanding someone, read what they read, read what they wrote, and also read what you might call the supporting cast, the minor characters wrote. And very, very often, in my experience, it's there in the letters of members of the family, the members of friends of the protagonist, people worked with him, people that were observing at close hand. It's there you get some of the most valuable insights from anyone. For one thing, they very seldom are writing knowing that they are going to be famous in history. They're writing from the heart, or they're writing critically, or they're writing peevishly, or they're writing in celebration of somebody that they greatly adore. The quantity of material of that kind I found on Harry Truman, for example, was voluminous and marvelous and very, very revealing of the true human being of Harry Truman from a place called Independence. It's almost metaphorical, allegorical. But you can reach them through what they wrote, and of course, that's largely available, impossible to reach to in places exactly like this. As Dennis said earlier, one of the greatest research facilities in our country, and a privilege for all of us who get to use it and work here every day. Then I feel very strongly that you have to go where things happen. You have to go to the battlefield. You have to go to the palace stairs and climb them. You have to get out there. And if it happened to be in winter, you go in the winter. And you go to get the feel, not just the facts, but the feel of the place, the setting. Settings are essential, and particularly childhood. As I'm going to be talking a little bit later, one of the most powerful lessons, it seems to me, from my work on the Wright Brothers was the importance of how they were brought up. The learning that was imposed and the values that were stressed in their home. And I don't think we know enough about that. And certainly history illustrates it again and again. Yes, education is all important, grade school, high school, college, and beyond. But how we're brought up at home by the people who are shaping us in childhood has really is an area that needs far more understanding and serious study. And that's possible. So you have to pay attention to the parents, even if the parents are long gone or deceased, when your work begins or your book begins, and to reach those other people too, you have to look at more than just documents. Whether you're talking about the parents or the minor characters, or you're talking about the major characters. And you need to look at photographs. Photographs are far more important as a source of information about those people in those times than most scholars, most academic writers, professors are inclined to take seriously. I have found again and again in almost every book I've done, except those set in the 18th century, that photographs often revealed much more than other people have noticed. And I'm going to show you some of them again. Here is a photograph of the Wright brothers, who, as it happens, were very interested in photography. And they not only photographed everything that they were doing all through the vital years of their development, the burst-powered aviation, burst-powered, motor-powered flyer, but they photographed every detail. Now, part of this was because they were protecting themselves against patent suits, but also because they really loved photography, and they knew the value of it when they wanted to look back and see what they might have done wrong or what was happening in the process. This is one of the rare photographs taken of them on the job or taking a break. They adored photography. They took pictures of everything, but they couldn't stand to have pictures taken of themselves. So there's only about 2 or 3 of them. And these photographs, which are all in the Wright Patterson University in Dayton, are all as sharp. They were all in glass plates. They're all as sharp as any of the finest photographs of today. As you can see, you can count the blades of grass in that picture. And that's in a cow pasture outside of Dayton that's still there exactly as it was where they first flew the first practical airplane, and is part of the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and has been saved to be exactly as it was when this momentous event took place. So old photographs, and when you look at them, you also need to look at what's missing. Ask yourself, what isn't in the photograph? Who's left out? That sort of thing. An interior, say, of a room, a living room, or a kitchen, or a dining room setting. What's hanging on the walls? What matters to these people? And more is to be learned from those photographs than is commonly understood. And it's also true of scrapbooks and postcard collections. What are they saving and why? And then it's essential, I found, to talk about what you're working on with librarians and archivists. Bring them into the struggle that you're having and get them involved, because they are people who can save you infinite wasted time and can open doors to ideas or possibilities that you never would have thought of before. And I have to say that I never had any better help from any librarian or archivist in my whole career than I've had from Peter Drummey of this staff, who is it was pure gold. Peter. And you talk about what you're working on. I've known so many people, they don't want to talk about what they're working on because they want to keep it quiet, keep it secret. Talk about it with everybody you can possibly, because you never know who knows something that you don't know. And that people that you would never expect know anything might turn out to have some clue, some idea, some bit of information that you would never have found otherwise. Now, when I'm working on a book, I'm often asked by some of my academic friends what I'm working on. And I tell them. And they say, "What's your theme?" And I make something up. And I have no idea what my theme is. And I'm convinced that's the way to do it. Do not have a theme. That's one of the reasons you're writing the book, to find out what the theme is. If you go into it with preconceived notions, the tendency is to screen out those things that don't support your notions and make more emphasis than is realistic on those aspects that emphasize what your theme is. It would be like stringing only a certain kind of bead, a certain color bead, on the string that you're making the necklace with. I go into a subject with as open a mind as I can, and I've never undertaken a subject, and this Wright Brothers project is the same. I've never undertaken a project that I knew much about. Now, that sounds like heresy to many people, but if I knew all about it, I wouldn't want to do the book. Because for me, the book is an adventure. The book is a detective case. And I want that unfolding evidence, unfolding narrative, unfolding revelation about the real true character of various people to be what propels, accentuates my curiosity. And the more we know, the more we want to know. It's what makes us human, what makes us different from the cabbages. So by going into a subject I don't know and having no theme, I'm open, wide open, is almost as if you were setting foot on a continent you never landed on before. And that's the excitement. That's what makes me want to get up out of bed in the morning. Now, I'm often asked, how much of my time do I spend doing research, and how much of my time do I spend writing? Which is a perfectly good question. I have never been asked how much of my time do I spend thinking? And the thinking is crucial. It isn't just finding information, finding evidence, finding clues, but stopping to think about it. What is this telling me? What's in this that other people have not seen when they went through this same process about maybe the same subject? And it's worked again and again. And it also helps you to get the flavor of the times. And particularly if you let the people of those times do the talking. If you see some point that you feel needs to be made or emphasized, rather than you doing it, let someone who was there do it. My old friend and wonderful mentor, the novelist Conrad Richter, once said, "Talk is half the business of life." And these people all talked. Now, granted, the talk that we can use of theirs is in letters, diaries, reminiscences, but it's their words. And very often, of course, their words, their way of expressing their ideas and feelings has a wonderful flavor of the time, and that adds still more to the sense of being there. I try to bring the reader into that other time, into the lives of those other people, and to make the reader appreciate how much more there was to these human beings than we generally would conclude from dry, deadly textbooks. And in my view, there is no excuse whatever for ever making history dull. Whether you're writing in a textbook or giving a lecture or writing a book about it, history isn't dull. Nor is it just about politics and the military and social issues. It's about the whole reach and realm of the human experience, which has to include art and music and philosophy and invention and science and medicine and finance and ideas. I think the two most important lessons, two most important subjects that one can draw from history are ideas and character. Character matters above all, and it comes through or it doesn't come through. And if the evidence is there, that's all the more reason to make the most of it. And if there what can be said, if there was one expression or one summing up about the Wright brothers that to me is most powerful of all, is they were men of great character. Not just courage, but character. The character of their convictions, character that they were brought up to adhere to in their home environment. Now, we also are living in a time, unfortunately, where the humanities, the liberal arts, are in decline and encouraged very often by well-meaning parents and well-meaning professors and well-meaning university administrators who feel that the oncoming generations must concentrate on the technology and science and the internet and the computer and all of that, because that's the world we live in, and therefore that's what they should specialize in. And when they graduate, they will have higher incomes, and therefore they'll be able to pay off their university debts, or their parents will have a chance to help pay them off because these young people are making good livings. All understandable and all a mistake. And one of the points I want to make tonight to you is it's worth thinking about that these two brothers, these two amazing Americans who solved the most difficult technical problem, the most commonly believed to have been impossible problem, had no scientific or technical training whatever. They were steeped in and raised on and educated in the liberal arts, period. They never finished high school, let alone never went to college. But they grew up in an atmosphere where curiosity was stimulated from the time they were old enough to talk. They lived in a little house in Dayton, Ohio, which is now at the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. A little house with no running water, no indoor plumbing, no electricity, no telephone, but full of books. And the books that were there were selected for them by themselves, to be sure, but mainly by their father, Bishop Milton Wright, who was an itinerant minister and who believed fervently that they must learn to use the English language, not just correctly, but effectively, and that they must read and read all the time and read above their level. So in that little house, along with a few very spare furnishings, were the works of Virgil and Plutarch's Lives and Thucydides and the Bible and Mark Twain and Hawthorne and Sir Walter Scott and ornithology and natural history and history, French history, American history, theology, you name it. It was all there. And they were within walking distance of the public library, where their father went regularly, almost every day, and they grew up knowing that's where you go if you want books and you want to learn more about any one given subject. They, the two brothers, Wilbur and Orville, and their sister Catherine, the younger sister, read all the time, as did their father, as did their mother, who alas died when they were still teenagers, and who was very bright, as was their father. Their letters have survived. Not just the brothers' letters, but Catherine's letters and the father's letters and some of the mother's letters. And they're all, thank goodness, in a great collection, in an immeasurably important collection at the Library of Congress. There are over 1,000 letters, just private correspondence, family correspondence in that collection. And none of those members of the family was capable of writing a short letter or a boring letter. Thank goodness. And when you read the quality of their language, the use of the English language, it's humbling. The vocabulary, again, two young men who never finished high school because they were too interested in other ideas and other things. They didn't have time for that. When their sister Catherine's birthday came up, the brothers teamed up and used what money they had to buy her a bust of Sir Walter Scott as her birthday present. Imagine. Now this, again, I stress, most people, from the 10 minutes the subject was given in high school, most of us, we know there were bicycle mechanics from somewhere in Ohio and they invented the airplane. All true. But there's ever so much more to it when you find out what they were like as people. They were raised to be honest. They were raised to work hard. They were raised to be good neighbors. They were raised to do their best at whatever they did. They were raised to have purpose in life, high purpose, a mission, as the father did as an itinerant minister, but they were to choose their own purpose. And they were raised to be modest. Remember modesty? Remember when that was thought to be a virtue among public people running for office? They never changed. They became the most famous two people in the world and were amply rewarded financially, not along just the limelight, and they never changed whatsoever. Now, some of that is a traditional Midwestern upbringing. Harry Truman once said, I tried never to forget who I was and where I came from and where I'd go back to, which is exactly what he did. It's exactly what the Wright brothers did after they achieved what they set out to do. Now, I find great gratification, satisfaction, excitement in trying to give people credit where credit is long overdue. I felt that way with Harry Truman. I felt that way with John Adams. I felt that way with the Roeblings, who built the Brooklyn Bridge. And I certainly felt it, in this case, with the father and, more conspicuously, the sister Catherine. She's always been sort of left in the wings, or if on stage, barely on stage. She belongs downstage. She belongs in the floodlights. Because if she hadn't been there, I don't think the story would have come out the way it did. She was extraordinary. And writing about her was, for me, a joy from the start to finish, because she was a character. She was feisty, wrathy, as she could say, and she was funny, and she watched them like a hawk, particularly after their mother's death. She became the woman of the house, and she was always there when they needed her. And she made them live up to standards when they seemed to be falling back beyond where she thought they should be. She's the only one who went to college. She went to Oberlin, and she majored in Greek and Latin. She was a top student, came home to teach Greek and Latin at the local high school in Dayton. And as Orville liked to say, as a teacher, she flunked many of the future leaders of the city of Dayton. And I feel the same way about the father. If I could have interviewed any one of these four in real life, if there were some magical way that I could interview, the father would be the one that I would interview, because he saw it all happen. And he had total confidence in them. And he was willing to back everything they did, even though he really didn't understand the technology and the physics and the rest that they were talking about. Now, yes, they invented the airplane, but they also invented flying the airplane. This is a very important point that most people don't understand. They developed a machine that would fly, but they had to learn how to fly it. So they were the first ever test pilots. And please keep in mind that every time they went up on a test flight, they were risking their lives. They could be killed. And they were very conscious of this. They weren't daredevils. They weren't show-off stuntsmen. They wanted to make sure that they got it right so that when they went up, nothing would go wrong and they would get killed. And they refused ever to go up together when they developed a plane that would carry two passengers. Because if only one of them got killed, then the other would still be there to carry on with the mission. They never married. They never went on vacations. They never got interested in material possessions. All they wanted to do was accomplish this purpose. And they were confident that if they didn't get killed, they could do it. They also had no money behind them, no foundation, no university, no Smithsonian institution, no Andrew Carnegie picking up all the bills. All that they expended for their work, they paid for out of what were rather modest earnings in their bicycle shop. They built bicycles. They built magnificent bicycles, beautiful bicycles. And they did all that work that they on their aviation experimental developments at night or on weekends, after hours. So they were customarily working not 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day. 8 hours in the shop, another 4 hours or sometimes more on working on their gliders or their airplanes that they were building in the shop themselves. And everybody in town thought they were wacko. It was common knowledge they were awfully nice fellows, very polite, very gentlemanly, but weird. And even after they flew at Kitty Hawk, the memorable historic day, December 17th, 1903, the world did not believe that man could fly. Strange as it may seem, we naturally think, oh, that was 1903, Wright Brothers flew, everybody knew the airplane had arrived. No, it didn't happen that way, because everybody knew man can't fly. The United States government took no interest in what they were doing whatsoever. When they had volunteered to bring their plane to Washington to show them what they could do, they had the door slammed in their face again and again. The newspapers right in Dayton had no interest in what they were doing. They wouldn't even send a reporter out to watch them flying, often, right 8 miles out of town. And when one of the managing editors was asked years later, how in the world could this be? It was happening right under your noses. What was the matter? He said, I guess we were just plain stupid. And it wasn't until a French delegation showed up in Dayton late in 1905, having gotten the word that this was happening and these brothers had done it, that they said, you come on over to France and show us, demonstrate what you can do. And that's what happened. They didn't like to do that, the Wright brothers, because they were profound patriots, but they just were sick of being snubbed and ignored. So Wilbur went to France in 1908, and on the 8th day of August, 1908, the 8th day of the 8th month of the 8th year of the new century, Wilbur Wright flew at Le Mans, the great racetrack town southeast of Paris, for about, in front of an audience in the little racetrack bleachers there, about 100 people. Within days, thousands were coming to watch the miracle, coming from all over France and coming from all over Europe. And that's when the world knew man had achieved flight. Now, before that happened, there were two very important Americans who were trying to achieve flight. The first was Octave Chanute, who was one of the most important bridge engineers of the day. Brilliant bridge engineer, French-born, but an American citizen, who built the great first bridge over the Missouri River at Kansas City. Still there. The other was Samuel Langley, who was an astronomer, who became the secretary of the Smithsonian, who developed what he called his aerodrome. And it looked like a giant insect. And it was to be launched from the roof of a huge houseboat just downstream from Washington on the Potomac River. Neither Chanute, who worked on gliders, or Langley, who was working on a powered air machine, ever went up in their inventions. Oh no. They left that to some other young fellow who was willing to risk his life. So neither of them ever learned to glide or to fly. Furthermore, Langley was using public money to develop his invention, his aerodrome. And while it doesn't seem like very much to us, it was a fortune then in public money, Smithsonian Institution money, Smithsonian Institution staff working for him. It wasn't even counted in what the cost was, of $50,000, and another $25,000 or so was contributed by a number of his wealthy friends. So well over $70,000. The total, and Langley's plane was launched about 2 weeks before the Wright plane at Kitty Hawk in 1903. In the winter, very cold, Potomac was full of sheets of ice, and the plane shot up into the air, launched off the top of the houseboat, shot up into the air about 60 feet, fell over backwards slightly, and then turned a nosedive right into the water, only 25 feet or so from where it took off. Total fiasco, total failure, and which crushed Mr. Langley in spirit, and he never recovered from it, and became the laughing stock, and taken to be absolute proof that man cannot fly. When Wilbur was asked about this approach that he and his brother had taken, he gave a wonderful analogy. He said there are two ways to train a wild horse. One is to sit on a fence with a notepad and watch the horse, and if you've collected enough notes on your pad, retire to a comfortable chair and a good lamp and write a thesis on how to train a wild horse. The other is to get on the horse and ride it, which is exactly what the Wright brothers did. They not only invented the machine, they mastered the art of flight. Now, how did they do that? They did it by watching soaring birds. And it all goes back to what they were reading at home in that little house in the back streets of Dayton, Ohio. And the importance of reading, of research, of the inspiration that comes from books. And the book that had the most influence on them, by far, was a book written by a French theorist who was also an extraordinary writer, very poetic. And Wilbur, who was the older of the two brothers, Wilbur, it should be clear, Wilbur was a genius, no question about it. Orville, the younger brother, was very clever, ingenious, mechanically, but he didn't have the reach of mind that Wilbur had. And this book, which was called The Empire of the Air, which had been translated into English, was published in Paris in 1881. Nothing Wilbur had ever read so affected him. He would long consider it, quote, one of the most remarkable pieces of aeronautical literature ever published. And the operative word there was literature. For Wilbur, flight had become a cause, and Mouillard, the author, Pierre Mouillard, one of the greatest missionaries of the cause, like a prophet crying in the wilderness, exhorting the world to repent of its unbelief in the possibility of human flight, unquote. At the start of the Empire of the Air, Mouillard gave fair warning that one could be entirely overtaken by the thought that the problem of flight could be solved by man. When once this idea has invaded the brain, it possesses it exclusively. Exactly what happened to the Wright brothers. "O blind humanity," Mouillard wrote, "open thine eyes, and thou shalt see millions of birds and myriads of insects cleaving the atmosphere. All these creatures are whirling through the air without the slightest support. Many of them are gliding therein, without losing height, hour after hour, on pulseless wings, without fatigue. And after beholding this demonstration given by the source of all knowledge, thou wilt acknowledge that aviation is the path to be followed." He was writing about one of his favorite soaring birds, a vulture that he liked to observe in North Africa, Mouillard was. And he wrote of him, he knows how to rise, how to float, how to sail upon the wind without effort. He sails and spends no force. He uses the wind instead of his muscles. Now, from that, and from their own observations of soaring birds, particularly at Kitty Hawk once they got there, and particularly the giant gannets, which have wingspans of 5 to 6 feet, who can stay up there, just as Mouillard writes, for hours without flapping their wings, just by riding the wind. It became apparent to Wilbur and to Orville that the wind was the answer, the ways of the winds. Now, I have a lot of Irish ancestry, and I love the old Irish saying, "May the wind always be at your back." But that's exactly what they saw not to be the process or the route to the success in this endeavor and in life. And one of the most powerful of all the observations written in Wilbur Wright's notebooks on his observations on soaring birds, which he wrote at Kitty Hawk, which is part of that same great collection at the Library of Congress. He writes, "No bird ever soared in a calm." If you want to get up there, you can't do it in a calm. You have to have the wind, which is why they went to Kitty Hawk, because they needed the wind, and also they loved the idea of all that soft sand, of the sand dunes, on which to land, and the fact that there were very few people living there, and they wouldn't be bothered much by the curious and the questioning of constantly kibitzers. When the people who lived on Kitty Hawk, and there were relatively few, as I say, mostly fishermen and their families, saw these two brothers who arrived there in wearing their business suits that we would wear on the streets of Dayton, and hats and starched white collars and neckties, out on the beach imitating the soaring birds and twisting their hands and wrists the way the birds twisted the end of their wings. They thought these two are absolutely crackpots. And it only was when they saw how hard they could work that they began to think, they're all right. As one of them said, they're the workingest boys we ever saw. And to work to survive on that the Outer Banks of North Carolina. They could, remember, no bridges, no roads. To survive there, it was a meagerest kind of living. It took all the work that anybody could give all through their lives from childhood on. The first written account of real flight achieved back at the Huffman Prairie cow pasture in Dayton in 1905 was written by a man who who produced beekeeping equipment in Ohio. A little fellow, about 5'4", whose Amos Roots, who had made a fortune with his beekeeping and who was interested in everything. And he got wind of what the Wright brothers were up to, and he went down to watch and see for himself with their permission. He wrote ahead and asked could he come. And he wrote this marvelous piece, which he then published in his Beekeeper's Journal. And it was not only long and detailed, but totally accurate. And it was the first published account of this miracle ever to appear in a beekeeper's journal. The New York Times, the Scientific American, Chicago Tribune, you name it, none of them bothered to even come and watch. When Amos Root offered this piece that he'd written to Scientific American for free to publish, they didn't even bother to answer his letter. So blind were they all to what had been done. And what a miracle that it was done by these two men. And how narrow viewed of us to take no interest in this. It changed the world in a matter of no time. We get on airplanes today, we fly through 35, 40,000 feet at 600 miles an hour or not, and think nothing of it. How did it happen? Who were those guys? How'd they do it? Now, I have never not found something that had not been previously discovered in any of the books that I've undertaken. So it's not as if it's all ground that has been worked over and there's no use to do it because you won't find anything new. Well, that's not true. You do. And this book was no exception. And what I found was very exciting to find, to say the least. And I think very revealing of something important that we have to keep in mind about imagining other times and the true human nature of history. When he was about 18 years old, Wilbur was hit in the teeth with a hockey stick in a pickup game with some of his neighborhood friends on a frozen pond in the area. And it knocked out all of his upper teeth. Now, this was a time when dentistry was pathetic, primitive, when anesthetics were virtually unknown. The pain was excruciating, and it took a long time just to recover. But it was also humiliating for him in the extreme. He was a handsome young man, and he was popular, and he was a good athlete, and suddenly he's this disfigured boy whose face was hard to look at given what had happened to it. And he retreated into a self-imposed isolation at home. He was going to go to Yale University. His father thought that was a fine idea, and he was ambitious to pursue an academic career. Instead, he stayed at home in the house, looking after much of the time his mother, who was dying of tuberculosis. And it was then that he began to read for 3 years in this self-imposed isolation. And it caused a terrific swerve in his whole life direction. The talk of Yale ended. He was off on this pursuit of knowledge, writing to the Smithsonian, asking for information, all of that. And as a consequence, it led him down a path that led to the invention of the airplane. This beneficial change that could have happened, but it was adverse. No bird soars in a calm. He had a headwind the likes of which nobody ever imagined, nobody in the family. Well, in Bishop Wright's diary, there is an entry that followed Wilbur's death in 1912. He died when he was still in his 40s. Tragically, died of typhoid fever. His father had warned about the perils of impure water all their lives. It was like a Greek tragedy. They'd been warned and warned and warned, and that's what killed him. But the question was, who hit him in the teeth with the hockey stick, and was it intentional or not? Well, in the bishop's diary in 1913, he writes to explain who the boy was that hit him and what happened to him. His name was Oliver Hay, H-A-U-G-H. And Oliver Hay lived right around the corner in the same neighborhood. And he became the most notorious murderer in the history of Ohio. He killed his father, his mother, his brother, and an estimated 12 others or more. Now, isn't it fascinating that one of the ultimate geniuses of our story as a people grew up in the same neighborhood with the ultimate expression of evil in a human being? Now, there's a tendency when you look at the pictures of residential Dayton and the house the Wrights lived in, the living room and the dining room and all that it was kind of a Norman Rockwell scene. And it was, to a degree, but not entirely, by any means. Now, whether Hay was executed in 1906, whether he hit Wilbur intentionally or not, we still don't know. But that doesn't mean we might someday find out. What's curious is there's no mention of this turning point in anything that the brothers wrote that has survived, or anything that his sister wrote, only this one diary entry put in there by the father. But what a thrill to find something like that. Now, I have to stress that my work has never been done alone. I made that point at the very beginning. And one of the great blessings of my working life has been the help of a marvelous man named Mike Hill, who has spent hours and hours and cumulatively months here in this wonderful repository, working with Peter Drummey and others, and who treasured that experience as much as I have. Mike lives outside of Washington, D.C., and so he's able to work with the Smithsonian's collections and the Library of Congress and the National Archives and other libraries and collections in the area. And he works for a number of other well-known writers and historians and biographers whose work you well know. And I think he's the best in the business. And it's been a tremendous blessing, and also one of the rewards of my working life to have such a friend. And he's gone with me on all of these treks around the country and around Europe. We've been not only to Kitty Hawk many times, we've been to Dayton, we've been to the Dearborn Museum, we've been to Paris, we've been to Le Mans, we've been to Pau, where Wilbur went on to demonstrate further demonstrations of his brilliant achievement in warmer weather down by the Spanish border. And you have to do that. You have to go there. You have to talk to people there. And everywhere we go, there's someone who has something to tell us. And everywhere we go, we have the reward of meeting wonderful people. People who will give up their time, whole days, in order to help, at no charge, at no fee. It's exciting because people do care. Lots of people care, and not just other historians or scholars or archivists. I keep coming back to the brothers themselves and what they wrote, and to Catherine and what she wrote. One of the most horrific experiences of all was when when Orville had a crash, when he finally was invited to demonstrate what they had developed at Fort Myer across the Potomac River from Washington, and thousands came over from the government, from the White House, from the cabinet, from the Congress to watch this miracle. And Orville went up and was breaking all kinds of world records almost by the day, at the same time that Wilbur was over at Le Mans demonstrating there in front of it. It was like a two-ring circus with one brother in each location. And then one day, Orville took a young lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, Army lieutenant, up with him as a passenger. He'd been taking many others. And something went wrong with the plane, and it crashed 75 feet straight down into the ground. And young Selfridge was killed, the first fatality in aviation history. And Orville was very nearly killed, had many bones broken, and he was badly scarred and bruised. And again, his confidence was shaken. He was horrified by the death of Selfridge. And when Catherine back in Dayton got word that this has happened, on an afternoon after she'd returned from teaching at the high school, she called the principal of the school and said she was taking an indefinite leave of absence. She was packed and on a train bound for Washington before the day was over. She then spent the next 5.5, 6 weeks with Orville at the base hospital at Fort Myer, making sure he got the best care possible and making sure that she did everything she could to keep his spirits up. It was thought that he would never walk again, and he would certainly never fly again. And she saw him through it, and he later said himself, and others did too, if it weren't for her, he probably wouldn't have made it. And she got him back to Dayton and kept working with him, kept encouraging, and he not only walked again, but he flew again. And at his insistence, much against the advice of both Wilbur and Catherine and the father, that he shouldn't go back to Fort Myer. It was too traumatic for him, too many memories, too many feelings of regret or guilt over the death of young Selfridge. But he insisted he had to go back where it happened. And he went back, and he flew again, and he continued to break more records. It's one of the most remarkable comebacks I've ever known in what I've written about. And one of the lessons that you get from this story is they would not give up. And they always learned from their mistakes. They always learned from their failures. Whether it was a technical failure with an aluminum motor block that they pioneered, split. When it was first tested, they built another one and it worked. Or whether it was finding that all the details, the data, the tables of technical mathematics used by people like Chanute and Langley were wrong. They were worthless, as Orville said. They then decided, well, we'll have to do that ourselves. So they created their own wind tunnel. They created little models of wing shapes out of hacksaw blades, and they created their own tables, which were correct. All way ahead of anybody at MIT or Rensselaer or the Smithsonian Institution, all on their own by learning from their mistakes. Their point was that if you're knocked down, you don't lie there and whimper and whine and lapse into self-pity. You get back up on your feet, figure out what you did wrong, do it right, and go at it again. And what a lesson for young people to learn today. And what a lesson to learn about use of the English language. Almost half of all the business schools in our country today require incoming freshmen who are all college graduates to take a basic writing course because they are incapable of writing a presentable letter or report or proposal. Pathetic. And here they are, these two examples of the young men that never even finished high school because of the way they were brought up. Wilbur was asked once, if you had to give advice to young people today about how to succeed, what would you say? He said, I would tell them to pick out a good mother and father and grow up in Ohio. Now, I want to read you something that the father, in closing, I want to read something to you that the father wrote about Wilbur after Wilbur's premature death, tragic death in 1912. He died in his bedroom at home at 7 Hawthorne Street, the house in Dayton, at 3:15 in the morning of Thursday, May 30th, 1912. He was 45. A short life full of consequences, the bishop wrote. An unfailing intellect, imperturbable temper, great self-reliance, and as great modesty. Seeing the right clearly, pursuing it steadily, he lived and died. Oh, that that could be said of more of us today. That's my talk.